as trustee for a special needs trust, also titled Private Professional Fiduciaries as Community Partners. It is one of the events of Connections California's Spring Financial Planning Series. As I said, Connections California is an online statewide resource and information hub of parents helping parents. And we're very grateful to Stephen Dale for putting together this fiduciary panel for us this evening. And Stephen is an attorney and disability rights advocate, also trustee of the Golden State Pool Trust. And joining him this evening on the fiduciary panel are Fiona McDonough. She's a licensed professional fiduciary and also president of the Monterey Bay chapter of the Professional Fiduciary Association of California. Heather Fisher of Fisher Fiduciary Services in Manteca, and Leanne Hitchman with offices in Torrance and Newport Beach. Amy Tesler from Stephen's office is also joining us this evening. And of course, Beatriz, our Spanish interpreter, thank you for being here. And if everyone can please remember to speak slowly and clearly to help Beatrice do her job, we'd all appreciate it. So I'm going to stop sharing now and turn it over to Stephen.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Hang on just a minute. Let me see if I can get the right screen up. Are we sharing? Let me know if it's working. We're good. Thumbs up. Okay, we have a lot to cover tonight, and I'm really excited about this presentation. For those of you that have been watching a lot of my presentations, I spent a lot of time talking about fiduciaries and different options and that kind of thing. And we're so honored to have three esteemed colleagues who are private professional fiduciaries, also members of a group called the Professional Fiduciary Association of California. We're going to learn about that. You know, I play two roles here beyond my role of being moderator tonight. I am an attorney who does a lot of special needs trusts here, and I'm also the trustee of the Golden State Pool Trust. As an attorney, and I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that are made, a lot of people figure that the most important thing is having a really nice document. And I'm not saying that having a well put together document isn't important, but in the end, it's the fiduciary that matters, okay? I mean, the fiduciary, as we're going to learn here, is kind of the captain of the ship and that kind of thing. And in the end, that is probably the most important person on the team, okay? So that's why, you know, I'm really hoping that if you don't get anything out of here, at least just a recognition or an understanding of what private fiduciaries are. Now, the other thing is, you might think it's kind of strange that the trustee of a pool trust is really excited about having fiduciaries, right? I mean, aren't we competition? Well, and maybe we'd be competition if we ran out of persons with disabilities, but I don't think we're in danger of this. This is something to keep in mind when you're looking at whatever you're going to do for the trustee of your trust. And our major focus is going to be on special needs trust tonight. You know, one thing about the disability community that, you know, is always true is that choices and options are good. And because of the individual nature of the persons with disabilities that we are serving here, having as many options as you can is really important. Lastly, as we go through this, if you have a family member who's looking for something gratifying to get into serving persons with disabilities, you might want to consider becoming a private professional fiduciary. California is the leader in private professional fiduciaries in the country. Now, I teach across the country, and we're seeing more and more private fiduciaries in other states. But this is one area where California is definitely the leader. So this is certainly, if you were a parent putting a trust together, this is an option you should seriously consider. If you are the leader of a disability group, you might want to partner with your local Professional Fiduciary Association chapter here. These are very valuable professionals here who can make sure that the trust, the plan that you put together actually is going to achieve its goals. Uh, so with that, I'm going to go through, begin, and we're going to go through a whole series of questions here. A lot of these are frequently asked questions, these first ones about private fiduciaries themselves. Then we'll get a little deeper into the woods. We want to get as many questions as we can as we go through this. So I'm going to try to take most of those questions when we're done. But feel free to ask as many questions as you can. So, and each of you, what I would like to ask you to do is on your first question, if you could just tell us a little bit about your practice also. So, Fiona, especially since you are a chapter president, you got the honor of the first question. What the heck is a private professional fiduciary? And by the way, the other thing is, who the heck is Fiona McDonough, who I just butchered your last name? So.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Alyssa and Parents Helping Parents, for having me here tonight. And as a professional, so a little bit about my practice. I'm in Monterey, and I practice in Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Benito counties. I'm the chapter president of the PFAC chapter here, and I have a big range of different fiduciary cases, including a conservatorship, couple of conservatorships of the person and estate, a few SNTs, some regular trusts, some probates. So our profession is an area that is fairly wide. So in the state of California, you have to be a professional fiduciary in order to administer more than 2 trusts or estates. And basically a fiduciary is somebody who's like an agent for healthcare or finances for someone who's unable to do so themselves. And in order to have a license in the state of California, you have to go through a licensing course. You have to have had a bachelor's degree or commensurate experience. You also have to pass an exam, have a background check. It's helpful to, be able to be bonded. You really, as a professional fiduciary, have to be bondable, which means that if you have a court supervised case and a bond is required, which basically sort of ensures that the case has the finances to back it if something goes wrong, you have to have the assets and the credit to be able to be bondable. So, as the professional fiduciary, you're held to a very high standard, much higher than like a family member or non-professional would be. You're ultimately responsible for what happens, and you can be sanctioned by the court if things go wrong financially or otherwise in the cases that you're responsible for.
Great, thank you. That's a great introduction into this. Heather, you're up next. Heather, what is the mission of the Professional Fiduciary Association of California? And can you tell us a little bit about your practice? And also, do you do something special for PFAC?
So I do. My name is Heather Fisher, and I am a private professional fiduciary in practice for 10 years. I specialize in special needs trusts. I actually hold a certificate in special needs trust management. For the Professional Fiduciaries Association of California, I was my local chapter president, but currently I sit on the state board and I am the chair of the education committee. The mission of the Professional Fiduciaries Association is to advance excellence in fiduciary standards and practices. We have a statement of purposes, which is to promote high standards of ethics and practice, maintain high qualifications for membership, require and provide continuing education, enhance awareness of and respect for the Professional Fiduciaries Association of California and its members, to contribute to the development and support of effective regulation, legislation, and licensing, and to promote communication among members to share resources. In addition to that, we strive to mentor new members so that those who do decide to become private professional fiduciaries aren't left flailing in the wind trying to figure out how it's done. We want to mentor people because we want there to be as many good professional fiduciaries out there as possible.
And then just to touch on this real quick, since you are the education chair, what kind of education do we have? And we only have a few minutes, kid.
Okay, super quick. We have all kinds of education. Anything that you could be looking for with regards to managing trust assets. So if you look at the PFAC website, there's what we have called the Fiduciary Academy. Taxes on trust documents, managing special needs trusts, talking to your attorney, talking to your financial advisor, talking to any other professional, starting a fiduciary practice, how to deal with difficult families, truthfully, anything that could come up in the management of a trust, a special needs trust, a conservatorship. That's what PFAC tries to promote, its education. And in addition to that, it's not just education as a fiduciary, it's education as family members who are working with fiduciaries or attorneys who are supporting fiduciaries. So there's a wide range of education. In addition to that, there's ethics that we promote, and cultural competency as well.
Fantastic. Great. Okay, and then for our last panelist to introduce here, Leanne Hitchman here, who do private fiduciaries serve? And Leanne, can you tell us a little bit about your practice? Well, it'd be better if you turned on your mic.
It is. Sorry about that. The dogs were
Okay.
barking and I muted myself. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Parents Helping Parents. So I got the best question. Who do we serve? And the answer is something called beneficiaries, which is, it's a jargon word in our profession, but it basically means the person that's supposed to be benefiting from these monies that the trust has. So we call them beneficiaries. Professional fiduciaries serve all sorts of beneficiaries. We're here to talk about special needs trusts, and so it's typically the beneficiary is the person that has some form of disabilities, special needs that trust has been allocated to serve. And as to myself, I have a practice of about 11 people in my firm, and my specialty is special needs trust, so that's where I spend most of my day.
Fantastic. Okay, plugging ahead here. When should you use a professional fiduciary here? And Heather, you drew this one.
So you can use a professional fiduciary really in any circumstance. If you're in over your head because you're managing trust assets and you find it to all be too overwhelming, or you don't want to expose yourself to the liability that's involved with managing a special needs trust or any trust for that matter, you can reach out to a private professional fiduciary. Professional fiduciaries are intended to be neutral parties. So if you have a trust that you're in charge of, that you're responsible for, where there's a lot of family dynamics and people are getting very upset with you, you can reach out to a private professional fiduciary to serve instead, so that there's not one single family member who's in charge over all the rest of them. When you don't want to burden someone else with the responsibility, special needs trusts are very complicated at times. There's a lot of rules that you have to navigate through. And if you don't want to burden a family member or a friend with the responsibility of understanding and learning all of those rules, a professional fiduciary is a better option. It can be daunting at times to think about the costs that are involved, but there's a lot of savings that are involved when you think about the skill set that a professional fiduciary brings to the table.
And once again, I think in my law practice, I think the private fiduciary is an absolutely essential part of the equation. And we'll get into this a little bit more later, but just because we have a private fiduciary doesn't mean that we're excluding other family members and that kind of thing. We'll talk later about advisory committees, trust protectors, whatever. But I will say, I just did a webinar last week on housing. And we went through 4 different types of benefits you could be on. Each of them has a different standard. It's really hard for someone who's not used to dealing with this, trying to make sense of all this and, try to, keep somebody on their benefits without disruption. Once again, I find the private professional fiduciary essential. So
I'd like to
go
real
ahead.
quick is that some professional fiduciaries will also serve as on a consultative basis as well. If, for example, you have someone that can manage trust assets but needs help with a specific portion of the trust, you can reach out to them to help with that specific portion without giving up complete control of the trust if that's a concern as well.
Leanne, how does the process work to be a private fiduciary? It seems like there's a lot of accountability going on here.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of accountability. So if somebody wants to be a professional fiduciary, then as was stated earlier, one goes through the process and becomes licensed. I actually interpreted this question, I think maybe I did so incorrectly, as how does the process work in terms of appointing a private fiduciary? Was that the intent, Steve, or did you mean how does one
My
become a
intent is
fiduciary?
what I think either one is fine.
Okay,
You know
so
what? We actually kind of covered the process and the licensing
yeah,
and all of that. So
yeah.
I like your answer better. Let's do that.
Okay, all right. So how does one appoint a private fiduciary to become a trustee? And I'm going to assume that the parents are working on some form of estate plan, and part of that estate plan is to name a successor trustee after themselves, because of course parents are the first people that should be named in administering any special needs trust for a beneficiary. And that's really a relatively simple thing. It is a paragraph in the trust document, and it just states who the successor trustee is after the settlers, or the parents in this case, who comes to serve. So actually naming the fiduciary is relatively simple. The harder part is selecting the fiduciary to make sure that your wishes are going to be followed by that person.
Right. And I'll just say there's a number of things to look at, because just one of the things here, when it comes down to selecting a fiduciary, whatever, is also having the ability to be able to change it if for some reason that fiduciary is no longer in practice or whatever. I mean, just kind of a word to the wise, especially for you attorneys out there, you need to have a lot of flexibility when it comes to who is going to be named as a fiduciary. I know for myself, the language I like to put in, like if I had somebody who wanted to work with Hitchman fiduciaries, I would name that the Hitchman fiduciaries would serve, or a private professional fiduciary, pool trust, or corporate trustee, whatever
Yeah.
makes sense as we go through, of some entities choosing. Because the real fact is, we go back to this, if you had a 17-year-old with autism that you were serving as a fiduciary, that person's supposed to live for 70 years, if they live a normal lifespan, and that's a long time.
Yeah, that's why I thought you asked me the question, actually, is because in my particular practice, I have a very strong succession plan, and I'm very fortunate in that case. And we specifically are looking toward that exact example that Steve mentioned about how important it is to make sure that there's continuation or continuity for that individual's lifetime. So, yeah.
Go ahead, plowing ahead. How many members are in PFAC, and how does one become a member? And Fiona, you drew this one.
Yes, so PFAC has over 700 members. And we have to apply for membership, which includes you have to have taken the course and gotten your, passed your licensing exam. You have to have 3 professional recommendations. You have to write an essay, submit your resume, and So, you know, there's a fair amount that goes into becoming a member.
And Fiona, since you're a chapter president here, can you tell us a little bit more on the chapter level, what PFAC does, and are there other chapters in California?
Yeah, there are many chapters in California, and my chapter serves Santa Cruz and Monterey counties. We promote discussion between fiduciaries in the area for support and best practices and sharing resources. You know, we work with a network of so many different people, vendors, and advisors in our line of work. And so it's great to have other fiduciaries to talk to about, you know, who's good to go to in this area for XYZ.
And I think,
So
go ahead.
we also provide meetings where we'll have a speaker come and usually have continuing education credit for those presentations. And our chapter does a lot of presentations that are also for attorneys, where we look at the legal side of things as well, since we're a smaller chapter. And so in order to draw in enough people, we have, you know, we want to also have it be relevant to not only fiduciaries, but other professionals that we work with.
Fantastic. So there's a lot of activity on the state level, on the local level. And part of that is that, you know, through all these classes and all of that, then you can feel pretty assured that once again, the fiduciaries are sharing resources amongst themselves. They're having programs and whatever. These folks are entirely focused on how to best serve folks in their communities and the different variations in each community. And I think this is the last question here for this series, and then we'll go to some others. Here is, what is the value of working with a member of PFAC? I think we've covered a lot of this, but Leanne, do you have thoughts of it, or why do you write that
Sure.
check?
Yeah, I think it's about the training. Really, it's about making sure that there's a baseline of quality and PFAC demand set.
Heather?
For me, I would say that it's about the resources. PFAC is about promoting education and a high standard of excellence among fiduciaries. And part of that is having resources available to be able to turn around and recommend those to your clients. And there's no better way to connect with resources than through a networking organization or an educational organization such as PFAC.
Fiona?
I would second what both Leanne and Heather said, and just also to say that, you know, when you have those resources at your fingertips, when, you know, we have a listserv with access to many fiduciaries in the state, you know, where we can get answers quickly, and that really saves time and money for our clients.
I'll just tell you, one of the great resources of PFAC is their listservs, and I'm a bit of a listserv junkie here, but I have to tell you, the questions and the resources constantly being asked, you know, really, once again, I think it's incredibly valuable, and it helps me serve my beneficiaries as well. So there we go. Well, enough about PFAC. Let's talk about other things. Fiona, you drew the first two slides of questions here. So, so what are the specific qualifications and certifications that does a fiduciary for a special needs trust need?
Yeah, so as you know, Heather also mentioned, there's a lot of special circumstances around a special needs trust. You know, you have to be aware of the benefits that the person is on, and in order to make sure that you're distributing from the trust in the proper way so that they won't lose their benefits. So it's just an awareness of you know, the laws and the standards around, you know, the benefits, and also what kinds of needs your client has and resources to help your client meet those needs as well.
Right. And I should mention, fiduciaries do more than manage special needs trusts. Our subject tonight are special needs trusts. But there's fiduciaries who manage all sorts of different trusts and similar devices as well. What services do fiduciaries offer in managing a special needs trust? And as the question has it, I mean, obviously investments, coordination with other professionals and whatever, but what services does the fiduciary offer? Is it just yes or no to I'm paying this or that, or is there more to this?
Sure. And also I wanted to actually jump back to the last question and just say that I think Heather mentioned that she has a certification in special needs trust. So there are certifications out there. There's a symposium that's run by Kevin Urbach, who kind of wrote the book on SNTs that I've gone to, and that is very helpful as well. And so there's just a lot of continuing education around special needs trusts, and it's really important to keep up with that if you have a special needs trust. So what services? So yeah, there's paying bills. There's keeping up with what's happening in the laws around benefits. There's investments. There's communicating with a client about, or the beneficiary about their needs. There's tons of communication with other professionals. I mean, it really depends on the case, but yeah, there's many different professionals that we work with.
And then, and this is something that, if somebody else wants to jump in on this as well, that would be great. But is there a set way the fees are set here, or what kind of fees might somebody expect here if they hire a private professional fiduciary to manage their special needs trust?
So it does depend on the practice. So I bill hourly, so it's just for the time, and I have a standard hourly fee, which is basically market for the area that I live in. And what a lot of the fiduciaries here do is just base it on what our court says is the reasonable amount for probate cases. So here it's $150 an hour, so that is currently my hourly fee. I know some fiduciaries do charge a percentage and they just bill monthly, and so they're not really they're not really being paid hourly, so it's sort of up and down. But anyway, in my case, I do hourly.
And certainly that would be something you want to check with your fiduciary, but up there, I mean, other than court monitored cases, here, there are no set rules. And that's, once again, my experience has been different fiduciaries charge in different ways. How does the fiduciary advocate for the best interest of the trust beneficiary?
Well, I mean, you have to get to know the beneficiary and know, what their interests are. And then, there's best interest is a term that is used, I think, in a couple different ways. So, I mean, I think like the kind of common usage is just do what's best for the client. And but then, if you get more into sort of the ethical definition of best interest, sometimes the best interest of the client is not going to be necessarily what they want. So you have to, look at where you stand on that, as far as what you're doing for the client. You do want to, respect their wishes and their views, and the culture that they come from. And at the same time, if there's issues of safety concern, then you're looking at best interest, which in the ethical sense is just doing what is in the best interest of their safety and so on. So yeah, kind of a technical answer.
Excellent. And also, does a fiduciary help with government benefit eligibility and compliance? And I think you could divide that into two parts, because one is, does a fiduciary help apply for benefits? And then what kind of compliance things do you do to keep them?
So, okay, so on one hand, you know, the beneficiary has to be the one who's making the choices about what they apply for and so on. And the fiduciary can help with that, but the fiduciary can't sign them up for benefits. So that's an important thing that people should be clear about, that as a special needs trustee, you know, you're not, it's not the same as a conservatorship where you can just sign paperwork for them and sign them up for things and handle all of that business for them. So there needs to be a cooperation from the beneficiary about getting eligible and complying and signing up for these benefits. Of course, you know, with my special needs beneficiaries, you know, we'll talk about like what kind of, you know, budget are we looking at, and how is the money, where is the money needed, and how can the special needs trust pay for things so that whatever the beneficiary's income, they're using it for what the special needs trust can't be used for. And then it's also like, how much can the special needs trust afford to pay, and how do we get the beneficiary in line with reasonable spending and reasonable expectations about, you know, how long this trust is going to last, and making sure it lasts their lifetime and not running through the money. So that's something that can be much easier for a fiduciary to do than a family member. And I just want to thank the family members that are here tonight. And part of just what I want to communicate about fiduciaries and their benefit is that sometimes it allows the family member to just be the family member, to just be the mom or the sister or the aunt, rather than having to do all these things that can put them in, you know, can really compromise the relationship.
That's so
Kind of off
important.
topic at some point.
Fantastic. How about changes in circumstances here? How do you handle that kind of thing?
So it like a sudden increase in medical expenses, changes in government benefits, you know, you have to look at, again, what are the finances? What are the assets in the trust? How are we going to pay for a sudden increase in medical expenses? How are we going to make that money available? You know, how sustainable is that? If there's a change in government benefits, that is going to make also a big difference, because it's going to change the income of the individual, and that has a long-term effect as well on the finances and how long the trust is going to last. So, you know, we have to just communicate about those things and look at how can we sort of correct course when there's a big change, so that we still keep the, you know, on track as far as, you know, we want the trust to last the lifetime of the beneficiary.
And we could almost squish these last two together, but what do you see as the biggest challenges facing individuals with disabilities and families managing financial affairs? And then what do you do when the money runs out?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I mentioned, you know, managing expectations about spending, you know, situations where I've come in after there was a family member as trustee and I come as a professional fiduciary. You know, I had to address, like, okay, there's been way too much. Well, there's been money distributed to you directly. That never should have happened. You know, you're spending way too much. I mean, you can't necessarily say that directly, but it's more about like, this is how much the trust can afford, you know? And for some people, that's the first time they've heard that. It's the first time that it's been put in a neutral way, where it's like, this is how much the trust can afford. How can we manage your affairs and your lifestyle so that this is going to work? And again, talking about budgeting and talking about dividing costs in a certain way so that benefits aren't lost. I mean, and another area is like where there's somebody who is not being very cooperative with like signing up for Medi-Cal or staying on Medi-Cal or submitting the documents that need to that are required for verification to stay on benefits. And in cases like I have a case like that where it was sort of close to being considered for a conservatorship, and they brought me in, and I was able to establish a relationship with a beneficiary where this beneficiary trusts me and allowed me to gave me power of attorney. And that's allowed me to take care of a lot of this business and then to help him and support him in getting, these documents and doing this paperwork so that that he didn't lose benefits. He was about to lose Medi-Cal. I was able to get his Medi-Cal back on track and have it retroactive for all the way back to December. And, and that saved the trust like $50,000, and nobody had been able to do it working with this person for 2.5 years. So it's about, creating those relationships. And so when you look at trustees, you want to, if you have somebody who's a beneficiary who's going to need that kind of relationship, you want to make sure that your trustee is capable of that. And what happens if the money runs out? Well, you have to, I mean, it's like the question nobody wants to answer, of course. I mean, I would say, before you even take on a professional trustee, it's important to look at the size of the trust and see if how long the money is going to last. And there are fees and expenses associated with a professional trustee and the attorney that comes with the professional trustee. And so, there's certain trusts that, really it would be better not to have a professional fiduciary as the trustee. You have to look at whether the trust can afford it. And a lot of fiduciaries will ask, well, what is the size of the trust? Because, you don't want to be in that position. And I mean, I think that for a lot of fiduciaries, if that happens, they will continue on the case and continue to work pro bono. But I mean, I can't speak for everyone on that. And then obviously, there's Medi-Cal, there's different benefits. If the money runs out and the person wasn't on benefits already, you can help them get on benefits. You can change, if they're in a facility, you're going to have to change the facility to something that is more affordable or that accepts Medi-Cal. So there's, different options like that.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Okay, Leanne, you're up next. How often does a fiduciary communicate with the beneficiary and their families about the trust performance and any changes in their circumstances? What types of reports do you provide? How do you communicate with family, which we call natural supports?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and sometimes that's delicate. Our primary focus of communication is with the beneficiary. And if that individual happens to be conserved or have a power of attorney, then obviously we have the legal authority to communicate with that person. I think where it gets a lot harder is where it's family who who want to have answers and perhaps are looking to the trustee to be the conduit for communicating what's going on. And I always look at it as transparency is a good thing, but the reality is sometimes I have a beneficiary who does not want some of that communication to happen. And if that is the case, my loyalty has to be to the beneficiary, and to a certain extent, I have to respect their wishes. However, I would hope that I can have enough finesse in what I do to be able to create a better bridge. And I have a really good example of that, of somebody who is probably schizophrenic. I don't know technically her diagnosis because one, she won't share it, and two, she's completely untreated. And she has a family member that really wants to know every little detail that's going on. And so I'm constantly having to remind that family member that he needs to speak with the beneficiary directly. But at the same time, I do try to provide some level of update because, in all fairness, in many ways, what that family member is asking for, he really wants to know, is she okay? And so it's a fine line that we walk on how to be able to communicate with different family members while keeping the beneficiary's privacy in order.
Probably a hard line to walk sometimes, huh?
Yeah, it is.
So one of the things about this is just keeping in mind, for all special needs trusts, trustees have sole and absolute discretion. Okay. But, the next question has to do with, what, how do you collaborate with attorneys, financial advisors, and other professionals here? And I happen to know that your practice has a lot of experience with financial advisors as well. So, how do you deal with those members of the team?
Yeah, so every situation's different. Certainly, when it comes to the financial plan in terms of investments, we're communicating at a minimum quarterly because we always want to have an investment policy statement and to be checking in with a financial advisor and make sure that we're on track in terms of any investments that we have. Um, how do we work? Well, how do we work with attorneys? Well, first, we don't want to be going to the attorney every time we have to make a decision because that costs the trust money, respectfully. Sorry, Steve.
No,
But
no.
at the same time, we have certain checkpoints where we do want to check in with an attorney. And probably for us, the number one example is at the time of accounting. We do like to run our accountings by an attorney and have them distribute to make sure that we're properly noticing the right people and to make sure that we have any proper language included in there. And that's very much a legal obligation. So that's an area where we would consult. Another area that we might consult in are public benefits if we're really struggling with some public benefits issues and the attorney happens to have that expertise. We might go to them. We might also go to a public benefits advocate and who specifically does that and try to get some help there. That certainly isn't for your everyday, do I have SSI or Medi-Cal, but things like Section 8 housing that Steve mentioned earlier that can get so complicated, we might feel that we have to go to consult with some sort of expert to do that. So it's definitely on a case-by-case basis, and it's always a balance between us providing the service versus going to an outside professional for help.
Okay. And then just going back to this, hey, when you are the trustee of this thing, you have sole and absolute discretion. So do you ever involve the beneficiary in decision-making processes?
Yeah, all the time. So examples of involving the beneficiary are things like when we're doing the spending plan, we always involve the beneficiary in that. And out of that comes part of our investment strategy, right? Because if I have a beneficiary, let's say they're 62 years old and they're very, very worried about running out of money. So I'm going to be listening to that both in the spending plan that I develop, but also in the back of my mind, I'm going to think about the investments that are being made. And I probably, given the age, of going to tend to be conservative anyway, but I'm going to listen to that beneficiary. And if they're particularly sensitive to any kind of market fluctuation, then I'm going to, it's my sole discretion, but at the same time, I want to be sensitive to that need and that sensitivity too. So I think we really involve the beneficiaries on multiple levels all the time.
Right. So what are some examples of successful outcomes or situations where your expertise has made a difference to lives of beneficiaries and their families?
Gosh, I got the $1 million question, huh? Well,
Yeah,
I'm going to
that's a
tell
sweet way to
stories
put it.
because I always tell stories. So I can give one example that might be a little bit scary to parents, but it's good to talk about the scary stuff, you guys, because that's how we get better at planning. And so we were the trustee of a special needs trust, and the beneficiary was in her early 60s, developmentally delayed, but very high functioning. She had regional center resources, and when we became the trustee, all the family members were pretty much gone. I mean, she had outlived her parents and her siblings and so on and so forth. And so we really had to rely on regional centers assistance in terms of determining the plan for this special needs trust administration. So we get some phone calls. Her name's Carol. We get some phone calls from Carol, and she kept asking for uh, like toilet paper, regular household things. And we thought it was really funny or odd funny, because she lived in a group home that Regional Center was vendored with, and one would assume that it was fairly good. Regional Center was on her case. But the calls got odder and odder, and we could hear somebody in the background telling her what to say. So we went out there and paid a visit to see what was going on, and I'll cut through all the details, but basically we didn't like what we found. We saw an unlicensed group home when we investigated their license. We could figure out that there was a whole lot of toilet paper and other kinds of supplies like paper towels in Carol's room. And what we deduced was that she was supplying the supplies for everybody. And then also while we were out there and climbing through all these supplies, is we learned when she blurted out that she wanted to go outside because nobody else would ever let her go outside. And we really believe that that's what we uncovered, is that there wasn't very good care going on either. So called Regional Center, said, hey guys, you have a duty to, case manage this. This isn't going well, unlicensed. And to be candid, they ignored us. They ignored us multiple times. And so I made an Adult Protective Services report, called Regional Center, told them I was doing it. Went back and forth several times. I think I ended up with 3 APS reports, but really good news. So in the end, got Regional Center's attention, got the service coordinator, and it turned out that there was a distant cousin that they had information on in their file about Carol. And we called that cousin, told her about Carol and a little bit about what was going on. And it turned out that she actually wanted Carol to come live with her. And that's exactly what we were able to help facilitate. Is Regional Center vendored the cousin as a provider. She was able to make some money, also got the IHSS for that. And it was this great symbiotic relationship, got Carol out of this yucky place where she was never going outside, bought a van for the cousin, and yeah, just a really good story, really good happy ending for them.
That is so good. I like those. Okay,
Yeah.
how about some examples of challenges here in managing a trust? And remember, we only have a little bit of time.
Running out of money. That's my number one challenge, is controlling financial expectations.
Yeah. I have to say, sometimes being a fiduciary is not the most popular person in the world, because
No.
a lot of it is setting boundaries. But hey, if you're a parent out there, you need someone to set boundaries.
Yeah.
So
Hi, sorry, I just need to interrupt for a quick second. I just want to direct people's attention to the chat where I will be putting those evaluation links as promised. And I get kind of annoying about these. I like to get at least 75% participation in the evaluations the night of. So I'm going to put them in now, and I'm going to return you to the Q&A. Thanks.
okay, and Heather, you've got the last couple of questions here for us, or at least the ones we've got prepared. What measures does a fiduciary have in place to ensure compliance with relevant legal requirements?
Well, first and foremost, as a trustee, your guiding light is the trust document itself. So you have to look to the trust document and its provisions for what your requirements are. And then if it's a court supervised trust, for example, then you have to look to the distribution standards, the accounting standards, and then follow those guidelines. And then your attorney can help you stay in compliance with whatever those requirements are. If you they have tickler systems to set reminders and file whatever necessary documents are required with court. In addition to that, we do frequent case reviews to make sure that clients are receiving the services that they are set up to receive or are in need of, and that they are in compliance with whatever the trust document says or the public benefits demands.
Great. And, you know, we always have to keep in mind that these tend to be very vulnerable individuals. And so we have to be like super on it as far as making sure that not only do we have compliance, but we also have safety and accountability. What is a typical process for ensuring distributions from the trust comply with government benefits and eligibility requirements? Now, as the education chair of PFAC, maybe you have some thoughts?
Well, I'm of course going to tout education. You can't beat education. You have to know what the requirements are in order to make sure that you're complying with them. So you stay educated, you frequently educate yourself with regards to Social Security and PALMs, that Social Security's rule books when it comes to what their requirements are. You stay up to date with Medi-Cal requirements, with regional center requirements, with Section 8 housing requirements. And it does become challenging to stay current on all of those various requirements. So one of the strongest tools in our toolbox for staying compliant with eligibility is the spending plan that Leanne had mentioned, because it's about planning ahead. And part of developing a good spending plan is looking into and understanding what benefits the beneficiary receives, so that going forward, as you make distributions, you know what you're distributing for in support of the benefits that the beneficiary receives. So the
Oh, go ahead, please.
spending plan also helps you to avoid any unplanned distributions. We call them the oh, by the way distributions. Oh, by the way, I need a new bike. Oh, by the way, I need a new computer. Oh, by the way, I need, food this month. The spending plan helps you to set a plan for what kind of support you're going to provide to the beneficiary, so that there's fewer and fewer of those, oh, by the way, unplanned distributions, less risk of making a distribution that violates benefits.
Great. And I was going to mention as we go to the next slide here that you don't have to be a member of PFAC in order to be a private professional fiduciary. But I will say one of the values, and by the way, I am a PFAC member myself. One of the values of PFAC is, give myself as an example, I'm kind of considered an expert in benefits. I don't think there's a single week that goes by that there isn't something that comes up where I just don't plain know the answer. And through the listserv, through the education, whatever, we get to communicate with each other and try to work out these solutions collectively, and we all learn together. So next question. How does a fiduciary manage risk associated with investment strategies and trust administration? That's a good one. And can you mention something about the investment advisor while we're at it?
Yeah, so we carefully vet our investment advisors to make sure that they are familiar with our probate code and UPIA guidelines, so that we stay in compliance with our ability to invest trust assets. What people have to remember is that, and I think it was Leanne, I'm sorry, I can't remember who mentioned it, but we are held to a higher standard. So we cannot invest assets the same way that an individual would invest their own assets. We have to take a more conservative, more well-rounded approach to investing, and we rely very heavily on our investment advisors to help make sure that we do that. And so when we've selected investment advisors to work with, we talk to them about what the trust allows, what our spending plan requires, and then we discuss what the trust and the assets that are held within the trust will allow in regards to the spending plan. So it's sort of a juggling act. It's a lot of times, if there's more than enough trust assets, then you create a spending plan, and then you just fit the investments into that spending plan. So you need to spend this much money, so we'll invest in these assets that will help to pay dividends and produce income. If there's not a huge need for spending early on, then we'll invest more in growth, and we'll discuss with the financial advisor the balance that's needed there. Where it becomes challenging is when there's not enough money, then you sort of work the opposite, where you might start with where you solve for a budget and you ask the financial advisor, hey, here's the life expectancy. I need you to tell me how much money I can spend every year and not have this person run out of money. And you can use the advisor that way to help you backwards piece together a spending plan to say to the beneficiary or the family, this is how much you can spend. Now let's whittle down what your needs are and what the other resources are available to help sort of supplement those needs.
Great. This is something relatively important. Can you say something about protecting trust assets from fraud and mismanagement?
And Steve, before Heather answers that, I just want to be aware of the clock on the screen. It's 7:28, and I know that a couple of our panelists need to have a hard stop at 7:30. And I'm just going to ask that if you, Steve, and I guess Leanne are able to stay on for just a little bit longer and finish up with the questions.
Sure.
Yes, great, thank you. And then I'm just going to ask, we're only about 30% there with the evaluations. If you could please just click on that. 4 easy questions, folks. Thanks.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can knock these off real quick.
I'll be real quick. So first and foremost, we limit the exposure. So we keep our trust assets in a very controlled environment. We limit the exposure, which means we don't do a lot of automatic payment type situations. We don't do a lot of online payments with trust checking accounts, those sorts of things. We frequently monitor all of our accounts. We're doing regular bank reconciliations. We're doing regular meetings with investment advisors. We have a system of checks and balances where it's not just one person that's writing checks, signing checks, reconciling bank accounts. There's multiple people within the office that are touching these files, looking at these accounts, understanding what's going in and what's going out, so that we're fitting within those guidelines. In addition to that, we carry errors and omissions insurance, which helps to protect against certain losses, employee losses, things like that. And then a lot of trusts and court supervised trusts require bond. Some private trusts can require bond, but don't have to. But bond covers, bad acts for the beneficiary of the trust. It'll cover those assets, and then look to the fiduciary who performed bad acts to recoup those losses.
Okay, and then real quick, this is our last question, and then we'll do an official we're done. But hang on just a minute. How about balancing the need for growth and preservation of capital? Do you invest the same for a 17-year-old as you would a 65-year-old?
Absolutely not. But again, the spending plan is the biggest tool here, because you need to work with the beneficiary to figure out what benefits they're receiving, what assets they have available to them, and then you build the spending plan and work with a financial advisor to mold the investments to the spending plan. So if you have a 17-year-old that doesn't spend very much money, you can put a majority of those assets into growth portfolios, so that by the time that they're older and require more care or have more needs, there are more assets available to them. Equally, if you have a 65-year-old that's spending like crazy, you don't want it to be in growth. You want it to be more in income, because you want it to be able to generate enough income to help, cover the spending that's happening. And so you find situations with everything in between. So you just have to take a look at your spending plan, take a look at the resources that are available, and work with the advisor to make a plan based on the needs both now and into the future. Remember that our goal as a private professional fiduciary is to make sure trust assets last the lifetime of the beneficiary and are used for their sole and absolute benefit. So sometimes that means saying no to the beneficiary because it doesn't fit within the spending plan, and we need to make sure that there's enough money to provide for their needs after the natural support is gone.
Sounds good. Well, it is 7:32. We're only 2 minutes over here. I'm going to say that's pretty good. I'm going to make this the official end and thank each of our panelists here. And maybe I'll even give Alyssa a few words here. And then I'm willing to hang on for a few minutes here to answer questions. But I just want to say, I hope we could have spent a whole nother hour on this. But I just want to really, for parents that are watching this, I hope this can kind of give you a flavor of the value of a private professional fiduciary for ensuring the quality of life for your child with a disability. I especially, if there were a prize today here, I would give it to Leanne for that wonderful story, but I'm sure you all have all sorts of wonderful stories out there because it's quality of life we're focused on, not just preservation of benefits. I really urge you, to get to know the private professional fiduciaries in your communities. If you're a leader of a program, here, reach out to your local chapter because once again, this is a whole area that when it comes to quality of life, that I think a lot of folks in the disability community really need to be more aware of, and we need to all work together. Lastly, the private professional fiduciary is a wonderful, sometimes challenging, maybe a little frustrating on occasion, profession here. But if you have a passion for serving persons with disabilities, you might want to check out becoming a private professional fiduciary. With that, I want to thank you. We'll take a moment for it to be officially over. By the way, you guys are dismissed, but if you want to hang on, that's fine. I am out of
Yes,
here.
sir.
Thank you so much. Those who have to leave,
you.
please do leave. Thank you, Fiona and Heather. I know that you had something you need to get to. Thank you so much for coming. I want to thank Beatrice as always and thank Leanne and Steve. But if I see there maybe everybody's, thank you so much for answering the Q&A. There are
I typed as fast as I could, you guys.
Yes, thank you, Leanne. There are a few left there. I don't know if you want to tackle them, Steve, if Fiona and Heather leave.
Well, there's one that kind of jumps out there if this is okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm going to leave too. Thank you, guys. Appreciate
Okay,
it.
thank you, Leanne. Take care.
Bye.
One question I see here is about the relationship between the conservator and the fiduciary here. And oftentimes there's a division. Sometimes, on some occasions, the fiduciary may actually service the conservator. But hey, Heather, since it's you and me now, kid, here, what is the relationship between the conservator and the fiduciary? Well, and I'll give you an example. If let's say you're dealing with dental care, right?
Okay, and so are we talking about a family member as a conservator or a professional fiduciary as a conservator? Okay, so the conservator, if it's a conservator of the person, that is a person who has control over medical decisions and housing and placement. And so a trustee of a trust will take direction from the conservator of the person as far as the needs of the beneficiary. So whereas a beneficiary who can speak for themselves will say, hey, I want to go get an apartment and I need you to help me pay the rent, or I need you to help me provide, proof of assets or resources. Then you would do that with the beneficiary. But in the case of a conservatorship, you take that direction from the conservator instead of the beneficiary. So remember that a conservatorship, it's just a court-appointed power of attorney. So it's somebody who can't designate
an answer to question I thought was wrong.
What? Oh, Amy? Oh, anyway, go ahead, Heather.
So somebody designates a power of attorney for themselves when they need someone to be able to make decisions for them when they're unable to make those for themselves. But somebody who is conserved wasn't able to do that step for some reason, so the court had to do it for them. And so that conservator is the person who gets to make those decisions, and then they're the person that give direction to the trustee or to the conservator of the estate, who is the person that manages money that's outside of the trust, whichever is available to them.
To me, an example when I'm serving as the fiduciary and I'm never the conservator, let's take dental care. I can authorize paying for the care. I can even facilitate the care, but I can't authorize the care. Either the person with the disability is going to need to be able to do that, or the conservator. So it is really important that the two work together.
Yeah, the trustee's authority stops with managing the money. I don't get to make decisions for the beneficiary. The beneficiary still has the authority to be able to do that. The trustee just manages the assets that help to support the beneficiary. So that's why we still, again, involve the beneficiary in a lot of decisions. That we involve the beneficiary in the spending plan, and we talk with them about the trust's purpose in supporting, their lifestyle so that they can live their best life.
Now, we had another question in here, which I think leads into something that we didn't cover. So this is what you get for hanging on, kid. Here, if the fiduciary and another trustee strongly disagree with something, how is it resolved? Let me change that a little bit. Okay. Well, let's deal with this in two parts. Do you, and I know it's a different answer for different fiduciaries, do you serve as co-trustee oftentimes with another family member?
Never. As a private professional fiduciary, you have a lot of liability, and you don't want to share that with another individual, particularly a family member. Again, we're held to a higher standard. So a family member who makes a mistake, can be overlooked, that can be set aside by a court, but a fiduciary held to a higher standard is going to be liable for the mistakes that they make. So
Right.
We don't serve with other individuals.
And I think that's common. I know some fiduciaries do. Well, I run a pool trust, it's not even a thing. But then here's the other part of this. It's very common with trust that they'll either have a trust protector or an advisory committee with family members. Now, for those of you that aren't, and by the way, if we had another hour, we definitely would have probably 15 minutes on advisory committees here. And, my experience is when they work, they're really magic. And when they don't, it's usually pretty spectacular. But, once again, oftentimes what you can do is if you have an advisory committee, you can have family have their input. And oftentimes if you get to a point where you can't come to terms, that can be kind of an issue. I mean, your thought on advisory committees and trust. By the way, a trust protector is a single person. An advisory committee or multiple.
I think trust committees, advisory committees, trust protectors, they can be very beneficial, especially when you have a beneficiary that you can't report to or that you can't take direction from. But trust protectors and advisory committees really need to be selected very carefully, because there needs to be no bias. They need to be able to act as that middle person between the beneficiary and the trustee. That's their purpose. They're an advocate for the beneficiary, but they're also there to provide guidance for the trustee where guidance doesn't exist otherwise. And so you want it to be somebody who can almost in a way be as neutral as the fiduciary is. You want them to be able to take in all of the information and make a decision that's not biased in any way. And when you have really strong disagreements, you do have the option, although the whole point of trust is to be able to avoid court involvement where possible, you can file what's called a petition for instructions to say, here's an issue that we're having trouble with. Here's the position that one trustee or fiduciary is taking. Here's the position that the trust advisor is taking, and we need direction from the court as to which way we should go. There's a resolution there. Another option is to notice the parties that are entitled to notice to say, here's a notice of proposed action that we're going to take in this matter. If any of you disagree, please, raise your concerns to us now. Otherwise, we're going to move forward. And then if you're not, then you have the opportunity to raise that concern and then force the trustee to, either make another decision or go that step further, like with a petition for instructions.
I was very pleased throughout the presentation that each one of you talked about distribution plans and that kind of thing. And I know a lot of the trusts I set up as an attorney call for an annual distribution plan to be put together. I find that resolves so many issues. Spending, what are we going to do? What are our limitations? I think one of the hardest parts of the job is to say no. Many of you have very bad Yelp pages because sometimes your job is to make people unhappy. But
absolutely,
yeah.
Plans are the sharpest tool in our toolbox because they allow you to set the expectation. They allow you to involve the beneficiary in the conversation. They allow you to set boundaries. And they allow you to have something to lean on to be the bad guy. You can say, this is not in keeping with the spending plan that you and I put together at the beginning of the year. And so for that reason, I have to say no to your request. Managing expectations is a very difficult part because so many people come into trusts like these and feel like it's their money. It's my money. You work for me. You're my employee, and so you need to just do what I tell you to do. And that's not at all what we're there to do. We're there to help make sure this money is there for your lifetime, so that you are always going to be taken care of, not so that you can live your best life for the next 3 months and then struggle to figure out how to live for the rest of your life. The spending plan is without a doubt the best thing that we have to use.
And I know we're going to have to go, but I'll tell you one part of this, and once again, we've talked about this in some of the estate courses and things we've had here with PHP, but in a lot of ways, it's a lot easier for somebody who is not a family member, somebody who's independent, to be able to set those limits, those boundaries, and work with folks for their development and that kind of thing, rather than have it with another family member. Lisa, I think we've pretty much covered what we can tonight, although we could easily spend another 1.5 hours on this.
We could,
Thank
and
you so
maybe
much for
we'll do
having
it
us.
again. I mean, maybe we'll do it again. Maybe we'll do something on advisory committees and trust protectors next time. So Steve and I will be in touch. Thank you. I guess Heather left. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone out there. We appreciate your time. I think I hear Mrs. Dale calling. So we'll see you next time. Take care. Have a good night. Thank you.
Take care. Happy advocating.